Right now, as you're watching this, someone you know is lying to themselves. Maybe it's your coworker who complains about their soul-crushing job every single day but never updates their resume. Maybe it's your friend who swears they'll leave their toxic partner next month, the same promise they made 6 months ago. Maybe it's your parent who's been planning to start living for the past decade. Or maybe it's you. You wake up and the weight hits before you even open your eyes. Another day in the life you didn't choose, the relationship that drains you, the career that hollows you out from the inside, the routine that feels less like living and more like slowly dying with your eyes open. And the cruelest part. You tell yourself you have no choice. You convince yourself you're trapped. You build an entire identity around being stuck. But what if I told you that's a lie? What if the prison you think you're in has no walls, no locks, no guards, just you, standing in an open field, refusing to move? Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist who spent his life dismantling comfortable illusions, delivered one of philosophy's most psychologically violent truths. You are condemned to be free. Not free in the inspirational poster sense, free in the suffocating, inescapable, absolutely terrifying sense. You are making choices every single moment, including the choice to pretend you have no choices at all. This is what Sartre called bad faith, the sophisticated psychological game we play to avoid the crushing weight of our own freedom. Bad faith is when you say, I have to stay in this job, as if economic reality has deleted every other possibility from existence. It's when you whisper, I can't leave this relationship, as if staying isn't the most active choice you make every morning. It's the mental gymnastics that transform I'm afraid to change into I have no option but to stay. And here's what makes this particularly brutal. The more convincingly you lie to yourself about being trapped, the more authentic your unhappiness becomes. The gap between who you are and who you're capable of being stretches wider every day you choose to stay exactly where you are. That gap, that psychological abyss between your actual life and your possible life, is where your misery lives. This isn't a motivational video. I'm not here to tell you everything will be fine if you just believe in yourself. Sartre doesn't offer comfort. He offers something far more valuable, the truth. And the truth is this: you are absolutely free. You have always been free, and that freedom is the heaviest burden you'll ever carry. Most people spend their entire lives running from it. But there's something almost liberating in how brutal this realization is. Because once you stop lying about being trapped, once you strip away every excuse and justification and victim story you've built around yourself, you discover something shocking. You can leave. You can change. You can walk away. Not someday, not when conditions are perfect. Right now, this moment. The only question is whether you're willing to pay the price. The pain you're feeling is real. The exhaustion is real. The sense of being stuck is real. What's not real is the idea that you don't have a choice. You're not trapped. You're choosing. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding this, you'll finally stop choosing the life you claim to hate. When Sartre said we are condemned to be free, he wasn't celebrating. He was diagnosing the human condition with the precision of a surgeon who doesn't care if the truth hurts. Freedom, in his framework, isn't a privilege you earn or a right you're granted. It's an ontological fact, as fundamental to being human as consciousness itself. And just like consciousness, you can't turn it off. You can only pretend you don't have it. Think about that word, condemned. We're condemned to freedom the way prisoners are condemned to their sentences. Not because freedom is beautiful, but because it's inescapable. You cannot not choose. Even deciding to let someone else choose for you is a choice. Even choosing to do nothing is choosing something. There is no neutral ground. There is no time out from the responsibility of being yourself. Sartre describes human existence as being for itself, a consciousness that's aware of being conscious, a self that can observe itself. Unlike objects in the world that simply are what they are, humans exist in a constant state of becoming. You are not a fixed thing. You are a project perpetually under construction. And the blueprint? That's on you, every single day. This is where the psychological violence enters, because if you're a project, then nothing about you is guaranteed. Your past doesn't determine your future. Your personality isn't your destiny. The person you were yesterday has no binding legal authority over the person you'll be tomorrow. At any moment, you could act completely differently. You could walk away from everything. You could reinvent yourself entirely. And that possibility, that terrifying, ever-present possibility, haunts you whether you acknowledge it or not. Sartre called this feeling anguish, but it's not the anguish of fear. It's the vertigo of absolute freedom. It's standing at the edge of yourself and realizing there's nothing stopping you from jumping except your own choice not to. It's looking at your entire life and understanding that every pattern, every habit, every "that's just who I am" statement is a choice you're actively making right now. And you could stop making it right now. This is precisely why bad faith exists. We invent stories about being trapped because the alternative is psychologically unbearable. We tell ourselves we're victims of circumstance, prisoners of our past, hostages to our responsibilities, because it's infinitely easier than accepting that we're the ones holding the keys to our own cells. We choose the comfortable lie of powerlessness over the uncomfortable truth of responsibility. When you say, "I have no choice," what you really mean is, "I don't want to face the consequences of the choices I do have." When you say, "I'm stuck," what you're really saying is, "I'm too afraid to pay the price of freedom." And that's fine. Fear is human. But at least be honest about it. At least stop pretending the prison is real when you're the one building the walls every morning. The cruel irony is that this self-deception doesn't protect you from suffering. It guarantees it, because the dissonance between what you tell yourself and what you know to be true, that tension between "I have no choice" and the quiet voice whispering, "Yes, you do," that's where your misery breeds. That's the psychological rot that no amount of distraction can mask. Sartre isn't asking you to embrace this freedom joyfully. He's not saying it's empowering or beautiful. He's saying it's inescapable. You are free whether you like it or not. You are responsible whether you accept it or not. And every moment you spend denying this fundamental truth is a moment you spend constructing your own unhappiness. But here's what most people miss. Understanding this isn't the end. It's the beginning. Because once you stop running from your freedom, once you face the vertigo head on and accept that you are the author of your own life, something shifts, not into happiness necessarily, but into authenticity, into coherence, into the possibility of living a life that actually reflects who you are rather than who you're afraid to stop being. The question isn't whether you're free, you are. The question is, what will you do with a freedom you can no longer deny? Listen to the language people use when they talk about their lives. Really listen. "I have to stay in this job. I can't leave this relationship. I have no choice but to continue." These phrases sound like descriptions of reality, don't they? They sound like simple statements of fact, but they're not. They're active denials of freedom disguised as powerless observation. This is bad faith in its purest form, the psychological sleight of hand that transforms choices into inevitabilities. And it operates with such sophistication that most people don't even realize they're doing it. They genuinely believe they're trapped. They've told the story so many times, in so many ways, to so many people, that the lie has calcified into truth. But let's strip away the narrative for a moment. When someone says, "I have to stay in this soul-crushing job because I have bills to pay," what's the actual truth? The truth is, they're choosing financial security over the uncertainty of change. That's not a moral judgment. It's just an accurate description. They could quit tomorrow. They could start freelancing. They could move to a cheaper city. They could radically restructure their life. But those choices come with costs, costs they're not willing to pay. So they stay. Not because they have to, but because that's what they're choosing. The woman who says, "I can't leave this relationship, it's too complicated," is choosing emotional familiarity over the pain of separation. The man who says, "I can't change careers now, I'm too old," is choosing the comfort of known suffering over the risk of new possibility. The person who says, "I can't speak up, I'll lose everything," is choosing approval over authenticity. Again, no judgment. These might be completely rational choices, but they're still choices. And the linguistic trick of replacing "I choose not to" with "I can't" is what keeps you trapped. Because once you convince yourself you have no agency, you've eliminated the very possibility of change. Sartre understood that language shapes reality. The stories we tell about our lives don't just describe our lives, they construct them. When you repeatedly tell yourself and others that you're powerless, you begin to live as if that powerlessness is real. You stop looking for alternatives. You stop imagining different possibilities. You become so committed to the narrative of being trapped that you'll unconsciously sabotage any opportunity to escape, because escape would contradict your identity. This is the trap within the trap. Not only are you choosing to stay, but you're also choosing to believe you're not choosing. You're actively maintaining the illusion while denying that you're the one maintaining it. It's a double lie, a lie about lying. And Sartre goes even further. Even inaction is action. Doing nothing is doing something. When you postpone a difficult conversation, you're actively choosing to prioritize short-term comfort over long-term resolution. When you stay silent in the face of injustice, you're choosing complicity. When you say, "I'll deal with it later," you're choosing to deal with it later, which means you're choosing to continue dealing with its consequences now. There is no escape hatch from freedom. There is no neutral position. You're always choosing, even when, especially when, you think you're not. The challenge is recognizing this pattern in real time, because bad faith is automatic. It's your psychological immune system protecting you from the anxiety of absolute freedom. Your mind will generate justifications faster than you can examine them. But what about my kids? But what about my mortgage? But what about my age, my experience, my resume, my reputation? These aren't invalid concerns. They're real, but they're also choices. You're choosing to prioritize your children's stability over your own authenticity. You're choosing to maintain your mortgage over exploring alternative living situations. You're choosing to preserve your reputation over expressing your truth. And that might be the right choice, but it's still a choice. The problem isn't the choice itself. The problem is pretending you're not choosing, because that pretense generates the very unhappiness you're trying to escape. You end up resenting the job you have to keep, bitter toward the relationship you can't leave, angry at the life you have no choice but to live. And that resentment poisons everything because it's misdirected. You're not trapped by external circumstances. You're trapped by your own unwillingness to pay the price of freedom. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people know this already. Deep down, beneath all the justifications and rationalizations, you know you're choosing to stay. You know you could leave. You know you have more power than you're admitting. But acknowledging that would mean taking responsibility. It would mean admitting that your unhappiness isn't happening to you. You're generating it through your choices. And that's a truth most people will do anything to avoid. But avoidance has a cost. And it's a cost that accumulates daily, silently, until one day you wake up and realize you've spent years, maybe decades, living a lie. The question is, how much longer are you willing to pay that price? Humans are narrative creatures. We don't just live our lives, we tell stories about our lives to ourselves and others. And here's the psychological trap. We become so invested in these stories that we'd rather maintain narrative consistency than pursue actual happiness. We'd rather keep telling the same story about who we are than take action that contradicts it. This creates what Sartre identified as a fundamental dissonance, the gap between what you say and what you do, between the life you claim to want and the life you're actively choosing, between the person you tell yourself you are and the person your actions reveal you to be. You say you're desperate to change, but every morning you perform the exact same ritual. You say you're unhappy in your relationship, but every evening you settle into the same patterns of avoidance. You say you want to be authentic, courageous, free, but every day you make choices that reinforce inauthenticity, cowardice, and imprisonment. This isn't hypocrisy in the moral sense. It's something more insidious. It's existential self-betrayal. You're not lying to others. You're lying to yourself so convincingly that you believe it. You've created an internal split, a fragmentation of the self where your conscious beliefs are at war with your unconscious choices. And this war has consequences, real psychological consequences that can't be ignored forever. The tension manifests as anxiety, the constant low-level dread that something is fundamentally wrong, even when you can't articulate what. It appears as depression, the emotional flatness that comes from systematically denying your own agency. It shows up as rage, the inexplicable anger at the world, when really you're furious at yourself for staying where you are. It crystallizes into addiction, the desperate attempt to numb the discomfort of living in contradiction with yourself. Sartre understood that this internal war isn't just unpleasant, it's existentially destructive. Because when you act in fundamental disagreement with your freedom, you break your own unity as a being. You become divided against yourself. You start experiencing your life as if you're watching someone else live it. There's a dissociation that sets in, a sense of being disconnected from your own existence because you're no longer the authentic author of it. How many people live this way? Saying they want one thing while doing the complete opposite, claiming they value freedom while building increasingly elaborate prisons, insisting they're desperate to change while meticulously maintaining every condition that keeps everything the same. The cruelest part is how this dissonance normalizes over time. In the beginning, the contradiction is sharp. It hurts. There's cognitive dissonance, psychological friction, internal alarm bells. But if you ignore those signals long enough, they quiet down. The pain becomes background noise. The discomfort becomes your baseline. The suffering transforms from an emergency into just how things are. And once suffering becomes your normal, once unhappiness becomes your identity, something truly dangerous happens. You start to define yourself by what imprisons you. I'm an anxious person. I'm someone who's always depressed. I'm just not good with change. These self-definitions feel like honest self-awareness, but they're actually the final stage of bad faith, the point where you've internalized your prison so completely that you mistake it for your personality. You are not your anxiety. You are not your depression. You are not your fear of change. These are conditions you're experiencing as a result of living in contradiction with your own freedom. They're symptoms, not identity. But when you make them identity, you give them permanence. You make them essential. And once something becomes essential to who you are, changing it feels like self-destruction. This is why so many people stay stuck even after they recognize they're stuck. Because leaving would mean abandoning the story they've built about themselves. It would mean confronting the fact that they've wasted years sustaining something they never wanted in the first place. It would mean taking responsibility for all that wasted time, all that unnecessary suffering, all those choices they pretended weren't choices. But Sartre refuses to let you hide in this resignation. His philosophy is a philosophical intervention, a forced confrontation with your own complicity. He holds up a mirror and makes you look at what you're actually doing, not what you're telling yourself you're doing. Your unhappiness isn't a cosmic accident. It's not bad luck. It's not the universe punishing you. It's the direct, predictable, inevitable consequence of living in opposition to your own truth. It's what happens when your mouth says one thing and your life says another. It's the price you pay for maintaining the lie. And here's the devastating part. You can continue paying that price forever. The dissonance won't kill you. It'll just hollow you out slowly, year after year, until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back. Until one day you realize you've become a stranger to yourself. But what if you didn't? What if you finally closed that gap between what you say and what you do? What if you brought your actions into alignment with your actual desires instead of your comfortable lies? That transformation is possible, but it only happens at a very specific moment, the moment we'll explore next. Every real transformation begins with collapse, not the dramatic visible kind where everything falls apart at once. The quiet kind, the internal kind, the kind where something fundamental breaks inside you and suddenly you can't continue lying to yourself anymore. You don't change when you read an inspirational quote. You don't change when someone tells you that you deserve better. You don't even change when you intellectually understand all of this philosophy we've been discussing. You change when the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving. That's it. That's the only formula that matters. Sartre understood this with brutal clarity. Human beings don't move toward potential. We move away from unbearable pain. We don't change because change is appealing. We change because staying has finally become intolerable. Before that moment, everything is negotiation. Everything is, I'll change when, or I'll leave once, or I just need to wait until. This is why so many people exist in that liminal space between suffering and action. The space where the pain is chronic but still manageable, where life is miserable but predictable, where every day is empty but at least you know what to expect. It's uncomfortable enough to complain about, but not uncomfortable enough to do anything about. And as long as you can tolerate it, as long as you can numb it with distractions, rationalize it with stories, or simply endure it through sheer force of habit, you will. Because change has a cost, and it's not a small cost. Changing means losing. It means ending relationships that have lasted years or decades. It means walking away from investments of time, energy, emotion. It means shattering the image of yourself that you've carefully constructed and maintained. It means disappointing people whose expectations you've been meeting. It means facing judgment from those who preferred you trapped. It means entering the unknown with no guarantee of what you'll find there. Change requires mourning. You have to grieve the version of yourself you're leaving behind, even if that version was built on suffering. You have to let go of the familiar, even when the familiar is poison. You have to accept that the person you were is not the person you're becoming, and that transition is a kind of death. Sartre doesn't romanticize this. He doesn't pretend it's a beautiful journey of self-discovery. He presents it exactly as it is, an act of radical courage. It's facing the abyss of your own freedom and choosing to jump anyway, knowing there's no net, no guarantee, no promise that things will work out. Just the leap itself, just the choice. And this is precisely why most people never make it, not because they don't want to change, but because they're not willing to pay the price. They want transformation without loss, growth without grief, freedom without sacrifice. But that's not how it works. You cannot become someone new while clinging to everything about who you were. But here's what's rarely discussed. Staying also has a cost, and in most cases, that cost is infinitely greater than the cost of change. The cost of remaining in a life that denies your deepest truth is the slow erosion of your soul. It's the gradual sickness of your identity. It's watching yourself become someone you don't recognize, someone you wouldn't even like if you met them. It's the accumulation of resentment toward others, toward circumstances, toward yourself. It's the quiet rage that has nowhere to go. So it turns inward and becomes depression. Staying where you are is not neutral. Time doesn't pause while you figure things out. Every day you choose safety over growth, you're not maintaining your current self, you're diminishing it. Every not now becomes a disguised never. Every postponement compounds, every rationalization calcifies, and one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 10 years, you'll wake up and realize that while you were waiting for the right moment, life passed you by. This is the breaking point, the moment when the cumulative cost of staying finally exceeds the imagined cost of leaving. When you look at yourself honestly and realize you can't do this anymore. Not because you found courage, but because continuing requires more courage than you have left. When the fear of wasting your entire life finally becomes greater than the fear of change. That moment is different for everyone. For some, it's a health crisis. For others, it's a betrayal. Sometimes it's nothing dramatic at all, just Tuesday morning. And suddenly you can't pretend anymore. The mask of bad faith finally cracks. The lie becomes impossible to maintain. And for the first time, the question shifts. It's no longer, can I change? That question was always answered. You can. You always could. The question becomes, am I willing? Am I willing to pay the price? Am I willing to lose what I'll lose? Am I willing to disappoint who I'll disappoint? Am I willing to face the uncertainty? And if the answer is yes, if you finally reach the point where staying is more terrifying than leaving, then everything changes. Not externally, not immediately, but internally, fundamentally, irreversibly. Because you've crossed a threshold you can't uncross. You've seen the truth you can't unsee. And there's no going back to comfortable ignorance. This is what Sartre means by authentic existence. Not happiness, not success, just honesty. The brutal, uncomfortable, liberating honesty of admitting what you've always known. You are free, you've always been free, and every moment you've spent feeling trapped was a moment you chose to stay. The hardest truth to accept is that you are already free, right now. Not when you finally quit that job, not after you end that relationship, not once you've saved enough money or lost enough weight or gained enough confidence. Right now, this moment, reading these words, you are absolutely, completely, terrifyingly free. For Sartre, freedom isn't something you achieve, it's something you are. It's not a reward for good behavior or a prize for reaching certain milestones. It's the fundamental structure of human existence. You cannot not be free. Even the act of denying your freedom is an expression of it. Even choosing to remain trapped is a choice, which means you're free. This sounds paradoxical, but it's not. When you say, I'm trapped in this life, what you're actually saying is, I'm choosing not to pay the price of change. That's not imprisonment, that's decision-making. And maybe it's a reasonable decision. Maybe the price of change really is too high for you right now, but at least be honest about what's happening. You're not trapped, you're strategically staying. Every feeling of imprisonment that doesn't involve physical restraints is, at its core, a comfortable choice disguised as powerlessness. You may not feel powerful, you may not feel like you're choosing, but that's because you've spent years, maybe decades, perfecting the art of not choosing, which is itself a choice you're making moment by moment. Sartre goes even further. He argues that even passivity is a form of action. When you do nothing, you're not neutral. You're actively maintaining the status quo. When you stay silent, you're making a choice about what deserves your voice and what doesn't. When you postpone a decision, you're deciding that postponement serves you better than action. There is no escape from choosing. There is no time out from freedom. This is what he meant by being for itself, this unique human capacity to be aware of our own existence and to constantly project ourselves into the future. Unlike objects that simply are what they are, humans are what we choose to become. Nothing in your past, no trauma, no pattern, no personality trait, has binding authority over who you'll be tomorrow. You could, this very moment, act completely differently than you've ever acted before. And that's precisely what's so terrifying. This kind of radical freedom is suffocating because it comes with radical responsibility. There's no one left to blame. Not your parents for how they raised you, not your partner for how they treat you, not society for the limitations it imposes, not even your past self for the choices you've already made. Because at every moment, you have the power to choose differently. You're the only one making your decisions. You're the only one living your life. Most people simply cannot handle this level of responsibility. It's psychologically overwhelming. So we create elaborate systems of denial. We convince ourselves that we're waiting for permission, for the right time, for circumstances to align. We tell ourselves we need more preparation, more confidence, more support. But all of these are sophisticated distractions from the fundamental truth. You don't need permission to be free. You already are free. The question is whether you'll finally start living like it. But why is this so hard? Why do we run from the very freedom we claim to want? Because real freedom requires sacrifice. It demands that you give up the victim role that's been so convenient. It requires abandoning the stories that justify your paralysis. It means losing the comfort of blaming external circumstances for your internal choices. And most devastatingly, it means accepting responsibility for everything, for the mistakes, for the regrets, for the years you spent lying to yourself about having no choice. That's why Sartre said we're condemned to freedom. It's not a celebration. It's a diagnosis of the human condition. Freedom is inevitable, inescapable, and absolutely terrifying. Most people spend their entire lives running from it, building elaborate prisons and then insisting someone else lock the door. But here's the turning point. The moment that changes everything. When you stop resisting your freedom, when you abandon bad faith, when you face your excuses with brutal honesty and finally admit that the life you're living is the life you're choosing, something shifts. Not into happiness necessarily, not into easy answers, but into authenticity, into power, into possibility. Because when you take ownership of your freedom, you also take ownership of your power. And where there is power, there is the possibility of change. Not change that happens to you, but change that you actively create through your choices. You stop waiting for someone to give you permission. You stop looking for signs that it's the right time. You stop negotiating with your fear. You just start making different choices. Small ones at first, maybe, but choices that express freedom rather than deny it. Choices that move you toward authenticity rather than away from it. This is what Sartrean freedom actually looks like in practice. Not a dramatic revolution where you blow up your entire life. Just the quiet daily practice of choosing honestly, of acting as someone who knows they're free, of making decisions, even uncomfortable ones, that align with your truth rather than your fear. But knowing you're free changes nothing by itself. Knowledge without action is just another sophisticated form of bad faith. What matters is what you do with this knowledge, and that's what we need to talk about now. The greatest adaptation of the human mind isn't intelligence. It's our ability to get used to anything, absolutely anything. We normalize the abnormal. We habitize the painful. We make friends with our suffering and invite it to stay for decades. And as long as the pain remains bearable, as long as we can still breathe, still function, still get through the day, we'll continue choosing the life we claim to hate. This is Sartre's most brutal indictment. There is no external force keeping you stuck. What exists is your silent, ongoing agreement with a reality that no longer serves you, but still feels safer than the terrifying alternative of change. And as long as that agreement remains intact, transformation doesn't happen. You'll read this script and feel it resonate. You'll nod along, maybe even feel inspired for a moment. And then tomorrow, you'll wake up and do exactly what you did yesterday. Not because you didn't understand the philosophy, but because understanding doesn't require anything from you. Action does. All real change requires a break, and a break requires crossing a threshold where the pain of staying finally, undeniably, exceeds the fear of leaving. You don't transform because you've learned something new. You transform when you can't continue the old pattern for one more day without breaking. That breaking point is your opportunity. That's when the impulse for change becomes undeniable. That's when you stop negotiating with your cowardice and start committing to your truth. Not because you found courage, but because continuing to lie to yourself has become more painful than facing your freedom. But here's what most people miss. Recognizing all of this philosophically accomplishes nothing. Freedom by itself doesn't transform anything. It only becomes real when followed by action. Different action. Concrete action. The kind that disrupts your patterns and contradicts your comfortable stories about why change is impossible. Bad faith only loses power when you stop feeding it. When you catch yourself saying, "I have no choice," and correct it to, "I'm choosing to stay because I'm afraid of leaving." When you replace "I can't" with "I won't because the cost seems too high right now." When you start making decisions, even small ones, that express freedom rather than deny it. This isn't about making grand gestures. It's about changing the micro decisions that construct your daily reality. The conversation you've been avoiding, the boundary you need to set, the application you need to submit, the truth you need to speak, the ritual you need to break, the pattern you need to interrupt. These small acts of authentic choosing are what begin to close the gap between who you are and who you claim to want to be. They're what transform philosophical understanding into lived reality. Because you don't think your way into a new life. You choose your way into it, one decision at a time. But let's be completely honest. Most people won't do this. Most people will watch this video, feel temporarily confronted by it, and then return to exactly the same patterns by tomorrow. Not because they're weak, not because they don't understand, but because the pain of staying, while chronic and deadening, remains just bearable enough. The fear of change, while irrational, still feels more real than the possibility of freedom. You'll stay in the job you hate until staying becomes more unbearable than the uncertainty of leaving. You'll remain in the relationship that drains you until the pain of one more day outweighs the fear of being alone. You'll keep living the life you claim to despise until the cost of continuing finally exceeds the price of change. And here's the thing. That might take years. It might take decades. It might never happen at all. You might spend your entire life in that space between chronic suffering and postponed action, telling yourself you'll change eventually while privately knowing you won't. Or you might be one of the rare ones who hears this and actually does something about it, who recognizes bad faith in real time and refuses to participate in it anymore, who stops negotiating with fear and starts making choices that align with freedom, who understands that the life you're living is the life you're choosing and decides to start choosing differently. The question isn't whether you can change. You can. You always could. The question is whether you will. Whether the pain of this moment, right now, is finally enough to move you. Whether you're willing to trade the comfortable prison of your excuses for the uncomfortable freedom of your truth. Because here's what Sartre understood that most people don't. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are not trapped by your past. You are not limited by your fears. You are a being of radical freedom, making choices every single moment, including the choice to pretend you're not choosing. And the life you say you hate? You built it, choice by choice, day by day, year by year, not through malice or stupidity, but through the sophisticated self-deception of bad faith, through the small, daily decision to stay where it's safe rather than move toward what's true. But if you built it, you can unbuild it. You can choose differently. You can act differently. You can become someone different, not someday. Not when conditions are perfect, right now, this moment. Because you are free. You have always been free. The only question left is what you'll do with that freedom. So I'm asking you directly, what choice have you been avoiding? What truth have you been running from? What price are you refusing to pay? Comment below. Because the moment you put it into words, the moment you name the lie you've been living, that's when bad faith starts to lose its power. That's when transformation becomes possible. And if this video confronted something in you, if it made you uncomfortable in the way truth makes you uncomfortable, then do something about it. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because the search for truth doesn't end here. It's just beginning. The next video will take you even deeper into the process of breaking free from the patterns that imprison you. Keep watching. You're not alone in this, but you are the only one who can choose to walk the path. The question is, will you?